his name, but I'll get that, I may ask about it. He's interested in our associate vice president position over the Deputy County campus. What the heck is his name?
It isn't this one.
I haven't called him back yet, but he had questions about it, but he said he was from the College of Engineering there at UW, and he was a faculty member.
Carol, she wants me to sign some minutes.
Yeah, we'll sign
Where
them.
they are.
I need
They're
the,
right
I need
there.
the name.
I'll give
It's
pass
it's
to
a
you to
pretty
make-
good sized faculty.
It's an odd name, it's
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so
French or
sorry.
something.
I'm sticking out.
And that's why I was thinking, because the previous dean is still there, but he was Australian, he was,
Yeah, that's Rob Edelman. He was an Australian and somebody French. I'll have to think about it for a
Yeah, I
second.
think
We've
I've
got
seen
everything
that.
under the sun over there.
yeah, I suppose you probably do. But I'm trying to determine whether or not I should call him back or
Gee, maybe if I'm lucky, it'll be in mechanical engineering and it'll open up a position.
position for me. I'll see what I can do, Kevin.
What time is the party Saturday at the Civic Center? Is that
Vicki, I'm gonna
5?
have the minutes approved first, and then we'll get to that.
There's not a party at the Civic Center, the concert starts at
Seven.
seven, yep. Yep.
There's no open house this year?
We're not doing the, we're doing the open house party, on December 10th here during the day to get more people to participate. And I thought that was on the agenda, but maybe.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
We don't have anything before the concert.
no, just the concert.
Okay.
I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. I'm sorry we're a little bit late this evening. The first order of business is to approve the minutes from the meeting on November 6th. Would someone like to make a motion to approve those? So moved. A second, please.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Christine.
Mhm.
And now we will have our election of board officers, because now we have Brenda on the phone, and I would like to take nominations for the chairperson for the board, please.
I would move the nomination of Carol Merrill to be our chair.
Thank you. Do we have any other nominations for chairperson for the board? Do we have any other nominations for chairperson for the board? All those in, I accept the position and thank you very much. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Second, we have board vice chair. Do I have any nominations for vice chair for the board?
I would, Madam Chair, move Kevin Kelty.
Are there any nominations, other nominations for vice chair of the board? Are there any other nominations for the vice chair of the board? Would you accept that position?
I would.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
You notice I didn't say I do.
Should we turn back?
No, I'm just trying to disrupt the seriousness of this occasion.
No, I was advised to be very serious. Okay, board secretary, are there any nominations for the board secretary, please?
Madam Chair, I'd like to nominate Brenda Little for that position.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for secretary of the board? Are there any other nominations for secretary of the board? If not, oh, Brenda, will you accept secretary of the board?
Yes, I will, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. And now we have board treasurer. Do I have any nominations for the board treasurer?
Madam Chair,
Yes?
I nominate that Ed Mosier continue in that position.
Thank you.
Second.
Are there any other nominations for treasurer of the board? Are there any other nominations for treasurer of the board? Will you accept that position?
I'll be careful listening to Kevin, so I'll say I will.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. That was very painless. And now we need 3 representatives to the LCCC Foundation. I myself would like to continue in that position,
I would too.
and Bill Du Bois would also.
I'd be willing to as well.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for that position, those positions? I think I'll just leave it there. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. And now we have to nominate and vote on 2 voting delegates to the WACCT board, I guess we call it. And at this time, that would be Ed and Brenda?
And Carol, this is Brenda.
Yes.
I have a heck of a time getting to the meetings because of my job duties. And so if somebody else would accept being a delegate, I would happily relinquish that because with my additional job duties, I have a very hard time getting away for the meetings.
Is there someone who
May I
would-
ask a question?
Yes, you may.
The delegate to the WAC, is that a voting delegate?
Madam Chair, the WACCT is a voting delegate, the representative. There are 2, and if one of those two, either one of them cannot attend because they are voting, then we do have a letter from our chair saying who would substitute for that. But yes, those 2 make up the board for the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees, and they are voting members. Long answer there, but.
But right to the point. I'd be willing to do that.
I'd like to move that Don Erickson be the other delegate along with Ed Mosier for those 2 positions.
Very good, thanks.
Thank you, Brenda, for telling us that you are unable to serve at this time, and that would be great. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you very much. And with that, I believe that we are done with our nominations and our new slate of officers. I would like to take a 2-minute break. Brooke would like to take a quick picture of the board, the new board officers.
The 4 officers.
Congratulations.
Oh, Brenda's not here.
Yeah, come over here and get
Brenda?
the phone.
Yeah, just hey, let's cyberspace.
Ed,
Maybe Vicki can give you my picture and I can.
How good are you at Photoshop?
Somebody can hold my picture.
I'll get you to do it.
Man, he's got it.
just a quick picture so that we can get out
Yeah, squeeze her a little bit.
We're taking a picture.
You look
I
great,
didn't know you
Brenda.
were taking- I'm just over at Mary Godfrey Playhouse. If I knew you were taking a picture, I might have hopped over it.
Run on
They're
over.
gonna Photoshop you in.
They can do it too. Thank you very much. And Brenda, I think this is probably, we're done if you need to move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, I'm gonna go get my makeup on. I think Vicki was gonna call me. I wanted to vote on the resolution of the board about the community college agenda.
Do you want to move it up?
Why not?
We can move it up on the agenda. That would be
That'd be
fine.
wonderful.
Okay, that's number 9 on our agenda. And Trustee Mosier was going to present this.
Oh, here, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Ed.
Yes.
Number 9.
As was discussed at our last board meeting, there were 6 items that the WACCT board had agreed to and were recommending to the individual boards for our legislative agenda. There was an additional item, number 7, which if you look at the resolution, which very kindly Joe, Dr. Schaefer put together for us, that incorporates a 7th item. And the 7th item, I would ask, well, first, let me ask, does anyone have any questions over the first 6?
And is there any discussion about the size of these salary increases?
There has only been that which was stated by the governor in his recommendation that I'm aware of. Dr. Schaefer may know of others. I don't know other comments.
No, Madam Chair, Trustee Kilty, I believe that the intention of the trustees and the presidents was to support salary increases, but do that in a way that wasn't at odds with what the governor might recommend. I think there's considerable conversation yet to happen. Oh, there's considerable conversation that might yet happen on there, but in terms of a specific percentage, neither the presidents nor do I believe that the WACCT board, picked the specific number.
I would agree with those comments. We would hope to, and I'm sure, no, I'm not sure, we would be pursuing this, that it would be biennialized, a nice term that is often bandied about, but to make sure that it's not just given for the first year of the biennium, but rather it be there for both years in the biennium and as it moves forward, would be the approach of the WACCT. And I would also ask Dr. Schaefer to speak to the last item if no one has questions about the others.
I'd be happy to, Madam Chair, members of the board. I don't know how much you followed the work and the agenda of the governor in regards to really trying to create an environment in Wyoming that would be conducive to high-tech industries. He sees technology-based industries, high-tech industries, as one of the opportunities for diversifying Wyoming's economy. We have a lot of that happening here, potential here in southeast Wyoming. One of the fundamental pieces to that, both from a state government perspective as well as from an infrastructure perspective, is really beefing up the state's network, their internet connectivity. He has made a recommendation for the funding of what's called Phase 2 of the Wyoming Unified Network Plan. From a college perspective, this is something that the community colleges have actually been advocating for a long time, so we can essentially increase the operational quality as well as the speed of our own networks. The governor has asked the colleges to support his recommendation. The CIO Council, the Chief Information Officer Council of the colleges, has advanced a recommendation to the presidents. The presidents have said, yes, we want to support that, and it would be sort of an appended last agenda to what we think would be a strong legislative agenda. And I think that's really where it's left at this point. And so I've added this to the resolution and would recommend that you do support the governor's recommendation for the investment in Phase 2 of the Wyoming Unified Network.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to add to what Dr. Joe has indicated. I've had the opportunity to attend the governor's broadband summit. He's had two of them, one last year and then one most recently toward the end of October, I believe. And the importance of improving the broadband and the interoperability and connectivity of the internet throughout the state, and particularly for the colleges, because the colleges, as I found out, we hook up here at LCCC at 150 megabytes, which is just horribly slow. I mean, it's like a Model T in providing the internet speed that is necessary. And I've also noticed a few times how many times the various systems seem to break down. And I think they're crashing because there's so much use on them. So I think that this is an important thing for us to also support. But my question has to do is this seventh item to the community college, to the WAC resolution. Is this something that we're doing independently to put on to this resolution, or are the other colleges also buying into number 7?
Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, and correct me if I'm wrong, Trustee Mosier, I believe all 7 of the colleges will support that. It's just the concept of the recommendation from the CIO Council came after the WACCT board endorsed the 6-item agenda. And so I think it'll be a 7-college commitment to supporting that agenda item.
But we are initiating it, and it will go then back to the WAC for addition to their resolution?
We didn't initiate it. The
Okay.
CIOs initiated it. We're following along with the others. Steve
I got you.
would have shared this with
All
others.
Is it appropriate for a motion then?
Yes, and I was gonna ask Ed to do that actually, so.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would move approval of the motion for our legislative agenda regarding the 7 items that we support for that, the coming legislative session.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 I,
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vicki.
thanks, Carol. I'm gonna hang up now and get on stage.
Great, good job, Brenda.
Yeah, we'll clap for you.
Thanks for letting me call in.
Sure,
Thank you,
our
Brenda.
pleasure.
See
Report-
ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Brenda. Report to the board, and we welcome Stefan Becker back. Hi.
So, hi everybody.
Hi, Aaron.
SGA president.
Yeah. So, yesterday, student government had the honor of having President Joe come to our meeting and talk with us. And so we talked about quite a few different things. He brought all student government up to speed on the Building Forward campaign or project. Now that the first step has been passed, what's going on next. So that was really useful. We also had a good conversation about the student ex officio. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah.
Ex officio position. So he's going to talk about it more later, probably. But we're really interested in doing that, and we're not quite sure how we're going to provide the student for that, but we're redoing our bylaws anyway, and so we'd really like to include that. And speaking of redoing our bylaws, it was brought up in our meeting that we might want to combine the student government from Albany County campus as well. But it was just brought up. We haven't even talked to them about it yet, but we thought that you'd want to know about that, because it would probably be good, because we are one student body. We're not, even though it's 2 campuses. Another thing that we talked about was that he's going to normally be coming regularly, and we're looking forward to that because we think that it'll help us a lot. So, yeah, we had quite a few people come in and talk to us recently. Like Jerry Harris came and talked about the Pepsi contract. Next Tuesday we're having Carol come see us. So we're getting excited about that. And we've been really busy serving the community. We've been doing a canned food drive that ends December 13th, and we're also helping out with the Giving Tree, and as well as sponsoring a few of the elementary kids from ARP Elementary. So we've been pretty busy doing that as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you have any questions?
Questions?
Madam Chair, you indicated that you were expecting Dr. Joe to expand on the student ex officio opportunity. You plan to do that later on in the meeting? If so, then I'll hold my
Now would be appropriate. I'll follow up with comments now if it's okay with the chair.
Go ahead
Sorry,
and
go
ask
ahead.
Stefan.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important in order to really get a student to be one that would buy into spending the time to be on this board is an incentive for that individual. Has there been any discussion as to some incentives that might be put forward to encourage students? And one of the things I was thinking about is maybe having a campus-wide election. And then with maybe some reduction in some of their costs. Did you, by any chance, have an opportunity to chat about that?
We actually did start to talk about that. We thought that as a student government, we thought that it would be better if that person came from student government, and that student government appointed that person or elected in the student government. the student senators already have scholarships, so there already is the incentive to run for student government.
Yeah, for student government.
Yes.
This is one big step above that.
It is. It is. But the thing is, we don't want someone who just wants the incentive to come, because we don't want someone who's just got the incentive and then doesn't show up to meetings, isn't all the way in, and they're just getting the incentive back. But
Madam Chair and members of the board, if I could, it was actually an interesting conversation, and Stefan knows it, because there were really varying perspectives on the position and how it would come about and what the role is, and really where we left that was that I believe SGA, the students really wanted to ensure that there was at least enough continuity between what the Student Government Association was doing and saying out to the student body, with whatever type of representation that they had here at the table with the Board of Trustees. And that, brought the question of, well, should it come from then an election of another senator position? And so they have the officers, but should one of the senator positions then, so senators are elected, then one of those actually be elected by SGA to fill this seat? Should it be a rotating? I mean, they really had some pretty robust conversation about it. President Becker is right that there is incentive through the scholarship program, and if this was seen as another duty or another opportunity position attached to SGA, we could already build off of one of the great incentives that we have to get students involved through the scholarships for participation in student government. But where we left it was, as I said, I would work on how I might propose to you it would fit within your governance policies, procedures, your structures, and they were going to hash out research and come to some understanding and proposal on how they would select that person and how it would get to the table. And so that's how we split the work, and I know they'll do a good job at that, but they're very interested in getting this seat at the table as soon as possible. So any feedback that you could give them or you want to give me and I can pass on, I think that they would appreciate it.
Excellent. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Stefan.
thank you very much.
Before I forget, and I might, is Wednesday Storm could not be here this evening. She's the other representative, and she wanted to be sure to invite the board to the nurses' pinning on Saturday, December 21st at 10 a.m. at the LCSD Auditorium 1, and a lunch reception will follow after the pinning at Story Gym.
What's the date?
The 21st, Saturday.
It's on the board calendar that's online.
Thank you, but she wanted to issue a personal invitation to the board, and it's very important that we can attend, that we do attend if we're available, because we have special seats at those events, and they know if we're there or not. So please try to come. Thank you. Next, we have our president's report.
And Madam Chair, if it's okay, I'm actually going to do this from the podium.
Perfect.
To keep me from jumping this stream. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just some updates that I wanted to share with you. The first one that I wanted to start with was notification that we are beginning the process of developing, writing, and putting together our systems portfolio. The systems portfolio is a requirement for our continued accreditation status with the Higher Learning Commission. We are part of an accreditation pathway that's called AQUIP, or Academic Quality Improvement Program, and one of the key pieces within that accreditation process is the development of a systems portfolio. Many of you have probably read through or at least looked at the one that was developed in 2010. That was our first systems portfolio. This will be our second. It will be due, I believe, either in late August or early September 2014. In talking about this with the cabinet and other folks on campus, there's been some feedback that I've received that have suggested, we got a lot of new folks on campus here who may not have a lot of experience with Higher Learning Commission or with the AQUIP process, and so there's some general orientation and education that we have to do, and that brought up the realization that there's probably some general orientation and information we should be sharing with you as a Board of Trustees. And so I wanted to let you know that I'm proposing to the chair that on your January 15th, I believe, meeting, your first meeting in January, we'd like to give a presentation, brief overview on the Higher Learning Commission, the pathways to accreditation, and the AQUIP pathway to accreditation, just to make sure that you have at least the basic information as we start down this journey. But the other reason I'm bringing this up tonight is because one of the first steps that we're working on right now is assembling a steering committee or an oversight committee to the development of the systems portfolio. And I wanted to throw out the opportunity for a trustee to be part of that steering committee and basically hear your thoughts on if you think there might be interest, and if there is interest and it's something that you as trustees would like to engage in. I might encourage you, if you have interest as an individual trustee, to share that with the chair of the board, and then we can look at possibly bringing one of the trustees onto the AQUIP Oversight Committee. So let me pause there to get some indication of your interest. Or
Questions?
Are you, what kind of time frame and when is this starting?
Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, most of the heavy lifting will start in January. In terms of a time commitment, in terms of the Oversight Committee, it really will be a January, probably clear up through August, and even when we submit in August or September. The level of work and the amount of work, I'm just not sure of yet. As we've gone through the criteria that we'll have to address, much of the writing is going to have to happen with people who have functional responsibility over the specific area that's identified in the category. But I want a committee that can help guide that process, help identify the research needed and some of the elements that are needed, and then to really function as a review and to be quite honest, an editing body as we move to the completion of the portfolio. So I don't know exactly how that work will lay out or what that will actually mean for the committee, but it's going to be a significant investment of time, I'll be honest.
Madam Chair, I think I would be interested in assisting with that, but I would think maybe a couple of us ought to, and I don't know if we could, I don't want to play switch hitters here, but maybe with the commitment, a couple people might be helpful in providing continuity for the board.
And Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, that's where if you have interest and if you think that's something that the board would like to be engaged in, let Carol know, and then we can work on how that structure will actually play out and what we might do.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
I'm still a little foggy as to what it is. I'm sorry. Systems portfolio, I heard you say something about accreditation and maybe other things, but I would like to maybe have some additional information, not now, but subsequently, so have a better feel for what it is this group will be doing.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, that's one of the reasons. We'll put a presentation on your agenda at your first January meeting and kind of go through the different elements and aspects of it. But in very, very simple terms, the systems portfolio is the self-study or the major documentation that we put together that illustrates that we are complying with the criteria for accreditation that are outlined in the AQUIP categories in the AQUIP process. Good, thank you. Moving on, Madam Chair, members of the board, I just want to touch briefly on the governor's proposed budget for the biennium. By now, I'm sure you've probably at least had the opportunity to read some of the articles in the newspaper or hear about his proposed budget. It was released last Friday, and many people have been trying to wade through it, and I'll be honest, I'm still trying to wade through it, but there was three things that I wanted to touch on there that are generating a lot of questions. The first is his recommendation for capital construction within the community colleges. His recommendations were somewhat of a surprise, and in some ways a pleasant surprise. The number one recommendation that he made for funding was for LCCC's Industrial Technology or Flex Tech building. And so it was nice to see that he recommended funding for it. We were a bit surprised to see that he recommended full funding for it out of the general fund budget. And so instead of the half that was requested, he has proposed to the legislature, to the Joint Appropriations Committee, that they fund $14.1 million for that project. So very pleasant surprise that he did that. Unfortunately, he did not recommend any funding for the second priority of the Wyoming Community College Commission, which is our Student Services University Center. And then went on to recommend funding for the state's share of a new building at Eastern Wyoming College, which was the third priority, and then made some statements in his budget letter about the value of some of the other projects, but really that, going to be left up to the legislature to figure that out. So the long and short of it is we have full funding for one project, no funding for the other project. It equates to about a shortage of $8 million in what we were hoping the state would pick up, and we're sort of trying to navigate where do we go with this necessarily. I'm not sure what was behind the governor's recommendation to fund the entire project. I don't know if it's still some confusion over the process for capital construction requests. But I was a bit surprised knowing that 2 years ago, when just before I started, the university student center was the #1 priority. There was some concern with the process in which the Community College Commission ranked the capital construction projects for the community colleges. That led to the governor calling an emergency meeting and making some decisions, which ultimately took that LCCC project off the table. Part of the rationale that we heard from the governor at that time was waiting for stability and leadership and really wanting to fix this capital construction model. So for the last 2 years, the colleges and the commission, I think, have done considerable work in really digging in and updating and creating very comprehensive but objective variables with the capital construction model, and putting together a system that truly prioritizes these projects that are brought forward. And so to know that this project again was at the top, not #1 this time, but #2, but then again to have it skipped over, especially when we have local support for it, I think it's got a lot of people scratching their heads. And so I'm going to do what I can to try to understand what some of the motivation is there. But clearly where our efforts go now focus on the Joint Appropriations Committee and our legislative delegation to make that case and really hope that we can secure that additional $8 million in funding for that project. There are a lot of time left in the game, if you will. The governor has, put about, I think it was $219 million in his recommended budget for the legislature to consider what to do with. There's funds there. Those funds are going to be highly sought after, so we've got our work cut out for us, but that's how his budget recommendations have sort of shaped up. He'll present that budget to the JAC on Monday, I believe, and then here in the coming days, we'll have presentations on capital construction requests to the Joint Appropriations Committee as well, and so I'll keep you apprised as things shape up.
Trustee Du Bois has a question, please.
I know this may sound ignorant, but if the state pays for the whole Flex Tech, can't the money that we raise for the Flex Tech go towards the university center? The Gateway Center.
Madam Chair, Trustee Du Bois, at first blush, I would think yes, but before I say that, we need to look at and make sure we're in compliance with bond language and all of those things, and to be honest, to see how the actual capital construction language plays out within the budget or within the legislation this session. And that's why I say when we look at total funds available, I think we're about $8 million short based on the governor's proposal. How that actually shuffles out, I just don't know at this point.
Trustee Kilty also has a question.
Is it possible that the full funding came from the Flex Tech building because it's viewed as entirely instruction space, and there may be some confusion about how much of this other building is really going to be instruction space versus other uses, and the governor's priorities are instructional space?
Madam Chair, Trustee Kilty, I think anything's possible without actually being able to pose that question to the governor. I don't know. I'm not sure what criteria or what rationale he used to make his determinations on capital construction. There's obviously something else other than the criteria in which we use through the Community College Commission's process to advance priorities for the state. And hopefully I will get some clarity on that as well. So I don't know if it's some lack of interest in the project or some other types of focus. I'm just not sure, and I really hate to speculate.
Trustee Mosier has a question, please.
I'm rather fascinated with the fact that 100% funding is there, because this would be, again, a different step from several years ago, well, not that long ago, when they first decided they would do 50% funding, and that was not assured, but by action it seemed to come out to 50% funding. And now to go to 100% is, that really puts a lot of different perspectives on the plate. I'll be anxious to hear what your discussions or opportunities for comments with the governor and legislators might be.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, I'm just not sure. Part of it could very well be that the entire process is relatively new. We've been doing it for, 5 biennia, where the state has actually been funding community college projects, and there's been various changes each legislative session. And then we had the significant time spent and invested in the community college rules updates that sort of outline the process for securing state funding. And then last session with Senate File 77, I believe, that shifted some responsibilities for capital construction from the commission to the construction management division. I think there just may be some confusion along that way. We've actually been following the quote-unquote recipe, I think, to a T. And up to this point, everything has been going the way from planning, incremental planning, submission through capital construction, securing the local share, advancing it through the State Building Commission onto the governor. We believe we followed everything to a T, and that's how we got to where we're at. Again, a very pleasant surprise that the governor would feel so compelled to fund that entire project, and I hope it is that he sees the value of that. But it leaves some questions about what happened with project number 2 and so on.
Was the project from EWC also fully funded?
Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, don't quote me on this, but I don't believe so. I believe it was the proportion of the funds that was requested from the state and would still require, I think, about $800,000 to come from local funds that I don't believe EWC has secured at this point.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I remember a discussion here not too long ago, maybe last summer, about maintenance money from the state for the community colleges. And if we do not have state money in the building, that we might not qualify for that maintenance money from the state. Am I correct in that recollection? Or has there been any changes? Where are we with, here's where I'm coming from. If, let's say, we had a good uncle that came up with $8 million to provide for the student services building, and it's 100% funded by the local, would the state be in a position where they'd say, well, you're funding this 100%, we're not going to provide any maintenance money?
Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, there has continued to be conversation about that. The Joint Appropriations Committee and other legislators were looking at formalizing the role or their approach to major maintenance. We anticipate seeing legislation to that, or at least language within perhaps a budget footnote, but legislation to that effect this session. I don't know where that will shake out. I think there is some perspective yet that if the state is going to fund major maintenance, it should only be on the portion of the buildings that the state has funded. I think other people see where our perspective may be that if we find ways to build these buildings without impacting state revenues, to just ask the state to pick up the major maintenance of it is actually a fair deal for the state. So I believe there's still conversation happening. Carol's nodding at me, so she agrees with it. I don't think we've had final resolution on that, and we'll just keep you posted as the legislative session unveils. Great. Madam Chair, I'll keep going here quickly. We touched on this earlier. The governor has recommended pay raises for most of the public employees at varying levels and with varying rationale. For the community colleges, what his recommendations were a 2% biennial increase, which essentially is a 1% in the first year of the biennium and then another 1% in the second year of the biennium. So essentially a 2% increase overall. And there's already considerable conversation going on regarding that approach of that recommendation. And then the last piece, as you know, one of the first priority on our legislative agenda was to fix the funding formula for community colleges, specifically doing away with the exception request for enrollment growth component of that. Seeking a one-time exception request to essentially put $14 and some million into the community college block grant that would get the community colleges where they should be when we include enrollment growth from the base year of 2004. The governor has denied that request and suggests that the legislature not fund that $14 $0.3 million, but he has opened the door in his language to suggest that we need to take a look at that formula and fix it. So that is a good step forward, although many of my colleagues who are feeling the strains of increased enrollment since 2004 without that enrollment growth funding are saying, that's great, but we're already serving, up to 1,000 students more at Sheridan College, for example, without the funding that really should flow to help serve those students. And so that may be a legislative conversation that will also unfold as we get into the session. Any other questions on the governor's budget proposals? If not, I will move through. The last thing that I want to share with you, and I appreciate you indulging me in a longer report tonight, is pertaining to the Wyoming Community College Commission's meeting on December 13th, which would be next Friday. In Rock Springs. Typically at their December meeting, they would consider and approve changes to tuition. And again, the Community College Commission is the body within the state that has the authority to set tuition for the 7 community colleges. As far as I know, they've always set that universal across the 7 campuses. Last year was my first experience with one of these meetings, and I'll be honest, I was a bit surprised that meeting was a teleconference that was slated, right before the holidays, right before the legislative session would enter, and was a pretty brief conversation with a presentation about how our tuition in Wyoming essentially compares to the tuition of the other western states, and use that as a rationale to increase 5%. And I believe that's the trend we've been on, is to increase 5% every year, probably for, Carol, last 4 or 5 years, to continue to do that. And at that time, Chair Wendy Sweeney had said, next year we're going to try to do this in a larger venue, and certainly would appreciate some additional perspective on tuition. And that's what I've been trying to grapple with, and ultimately what I want to present to you tonight, just to give you some consideration and ask you for some guidance on how I should shape my communication to the commission next week when we're in Rock Springs. So I threw together this presentation just to try to provide a very high-level perspective. Right now, the commission's policy and the approach that they take to looking at tuition setting is essentially a benchmarking approach that looks at how we rank in terms of the average tuition within the WICHE states, the western states that are part of the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education. And take a look at that and advance recommendations based on where we're at with that. And when you look at tuition in general, Wyoming is a wonderful deal. And in fact, we are arguably the lowest until we added in the Mariana Islands into the WICHE states. The lowest in the West, and when you look at the United States in general, I believe Wyoming continues to be one of the lowest for tuition, if not the lowest in the United States for tuition. And when you look at tuition as compared to the median household income, because we do, as you heard at dinner, our median household income in Wyoming is quite strong compared nationally. And when you look at the percent of the average household income, the median household income, that it takes to pay for tuition at a community college, again, Wyoming is at the very bottom with 4.2% of that. So just looking at it from a tuition perspective, you would say, yes, it's a great deal. We charge significantly less than other states in our region do for tuition at the public 2-year colleges. But that's not the whole picture, because if you look at the other element of the funding that we receive to educate our students, which is state support, it's almost the converse of that. Wyoming continues to fund its community colleges and higher education exceptionally well. In the western states, we only rank behind Alaska. And in the United States, we are the second behind Alaska in terms of educational appropriations per student FTE in Wyoming. So while tuition is low, and that's one part of the resources that we need to educate our students, state funding is incredibly healthy here, and we're blessed to have it that way, and our students are blessed to have it that way. So when you took a look at the picture of total funding in the WICHE states, tuition and fees, yes, tuition is a small part of the funding that we use to educate our students, but when you look at the total picture, we fall only second to Alaska and to Hawaii. And if you go all the way down and look at Idaho, Washington, and I'd even argue to Colorado, Yes, Colorado's tuition is higher, but the total funding they have per student FTE is actually lower than Wyoming's because the state doesn't contribute as much to do that. So let me keep going here. So then we look at state investment and think about, okay, well, sometimes when you're thinking about tuition considerations, you may have to look at trends in either decreased state funding or in increases in operational expenditures. You know, and that's one of the things you hire me to do, is make sure I understand whether or not operational expenditures are increasing, decreasing, what's happening. But then we also look at what the state's doing. And when you look at the percent change in state funding per FTE at the WICHE states over the last 5 years, you see there's only 4 of us that have actually had an increased state funding in that time. And we're number 2, right behind North Dakota, with an increase of 32.3%. So the state is not decreasing its funding significantly. Yes, we took a 6% reduction here this last year, and we felt some of that. But if you look at the 5-year trend, the amount of money the state's putting into the community college is increasing. Which again would beget the question of where's the need for tuition increases. And then just a few other conversations. You heard this at lunch. We have a small portion of our students that actually take out loans. That's maybe a good thing. Unfortunately, the default rate of those small students is higher than what we want it to be. And using the new 3-year cohort default rate, national average of all institutions is 18%. Wyoming's at 16%, and our trend is actually moving towards that national average, which would suggest that those students who are borrowing are defaulting at a greater and greater rate each year we go. Then if we just take in total student debt and what's happening with student debt in the nation right now, it has now become the 2nd largest debt category next to home mortgages in the nation, estimated to be over $1 trillion and growing rapidly. And the cost of education is what is always attributed to that increased debt limit as we go through with it. And so we have to question, do we want to contribute to that? Can we find ways not to have to contribute to that? And then the last one is this one that I find from a practicality standpoint, and I know that there's some policy issues with that, but it's the fact that we had tuition discussions before we have legislative discussions about state spending and funding for community colleges. And when I look at tuition, I look at the necessary investment that students have to make so that we can provide them a high-quality education. Before we know what our surplus or deficit is in funding to serve those students, we really have to have a picture of where 60% of our funding is coming from, and that's the state. It seems that it would be a much more student-centered approach and really a much more effective approach to determine what we have for state spending, state funding for community colleges, and then identify whether or not there's a gap that needs to be made up through tuition increases. So as I grapple with this and I look at this and thinking about the way that the tuition considerations were handled last year, I'd really like to carry a message on behalf of LCCC. I need your guidance and perspective on that. But right now, the only compelling justification that I can see for increasing tuition, and what they're recommending is another 5%. It's $4 per credit hour. It may seem very nominal to many of us. But the only rationale that I've been able to find for that at this point is that we charge less than the Western states do. And I don't know if that's enough rationale that I can sit and look our students in the eyes and say we're increasing your tuition just because of that. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd love to hear your feedback, questions, considerations.
Trustee Kelty?
In public finance in general, we should probably not tax people, and a tuition maybe can be thought of as something akin to a tax. We shouldn't tax people to spend on projects that have very little return when leaving money in the student's pocket would have greater return. And so the real question to ask is, what do we plan to do with that money? And if the things that we plan to do with that money are fairly poor plans, it makes more sense to leave it in the student's pocket and not increase the tuition. Plus, that's sort of consistent with the state constitution, which says we're trying to keep education as affordable as possible, and low tuition certainly is, something toward that goal. But I really think it boils down to what would we do with the money if we were to raise tuition? And I would say in the years, and I think I can say this without too much contradiction, in the years where we really had rapid budget growth, we didn't use that money very wisely. A lot of it went to fueling, if you'll excuse me, more administration. And not all of that was was necessarily good for either the taxpayers or the students. So I think we should think much more about what we would do with a tuition increase if we were to enact one, and otherwise leave it alone. Now, I suppose there's some possibility of of implementing some tuition increase for one category of student, which might be out-of-state students, and leave the rest of it alone. But once again, would we like to keep that tuition low for out-of-state students and attract more out-of-state students? There's an argument for doing that as well. So
Yeah.
I'll just leave you with those thoughts.
Madam Chair and Dr. Kilty, I would concur. I would add one other consideration, and that's not just what would we do with the new money, but are we truly utilizing the money that we have right now to its fullest extent? And that is one of the things that I can tell you honestly, we have room to improve as community colleges across the state, but certainly here. And I think that we at least owe it to our students to do that first before we say to keep the quality of education where we want it to be, we need to ask you to raise your tuition.
Go ahead.
There's one comment in there that I could maybe quibble with. You actually said that the rising cost in education was fueling this debt. It's quite possible it's the other way around, that the ease of going into debt for education has fueled the rise in the cost of education. Pretty hard to put a finger on what caused what there.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Trustee Kilty, I would not try to identify causality one way or the other in that relationship, because it opens up a can of worms that leads us down to so many different avenues, from the effective use of dollars within institutional operations to the rising cost of living to all of those things. But I would agree with you.
Trustee Du Bois?
I just want to ask a question. I'm very much opposed to a tuition raise, and I hope that you will present it that way. Why, does it have to be done in December, or couldn't this be done at a spring meeting after we see what the legislature gives us, or gives the colleges in general? I mean, I don't know why it has to be done now. Is there some law about that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Du Bois, I believe right now it's actually in statute that requires the commission to consider and take action on tuition in December. So that would require some change.
Madam Chair, it's not that they couldn't talk about it and deal with it earlier, but you're right, that's in the rules there. I got a couple things that, no, I don't want to see the tuition increase, and I find it, as you pointed out, inappropriate that we're talking about raising revenue without having some rationale for the expense that revenue is to cover. If it's just to shift the cost from student or from the state to the student, well, okay, but that's not what they've talked about. It's just lower than other states, so let's raise it. And I think back to a quote that I think is appropriate for this, that Bill would probably like. This is from John Adams, 1785. The whole people must take upon themselves the education of the whole people and be willing to bear the expenses of it. There should not be a district of 1 mile square without a school in it, not founded by a charitable individual, but maintained at the public expense of the people themselves. And I know this is K through 12, more likely John is talking about, but it's very appropriate for community colleges and education in general today.
And Madam Chair, Trustee Moser, a very apropos comment and quote, and I think with the world that we live in today, K-12 cannot be considered as the ending point. I think community college education and probably beyond needs to be. So the perspective of the social compact that we have to provide education to the generations that follow us should actually be strengthened and expanded in the future. Would agree.
I don't know what the statutes and the rules regarding tuition increases is, but if the commission decided to increase tuition, would we necessarily have to go along? Does it have to be done uniformly across the state?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Dr. Kilty, yes, they set the tuition, and that becomes the effective tuition rate for the institution. However, back to your previous question, what we do with those funds can take on a lot of iterations. So, for example, you heard about the work that we're doing with trying to put scholarship dollars to fill unmet need. It may be a very viable option, should the commission do this, that we take a look at what we estimate, Carol, may be $300,000 for us. we take a look at that and say, you know, that money will be charged to all, but it may impact others in a greater way. Those that can afford to pay it may be able to, those that can't may struggle. If we took those dollars to actually get to that higher level of a need-based scholarship program, we could redirect those funds to the students that have those needs and maybe mitigate things. So I think there are solutions in which we could deploy those resources that may help us mitigate the impact, especially those that have the greatest need. But again, I'd rather see us not do it first.
Trustee Martin?
Madam Chair, Dr. Schaefer was kind enough to help me get some data earlier today, and I think it points out, we're looking at about 1.7 million that it generates for the system-wide. Again, that doesn't take into effect all issues on changes of enrollment, but that's a pretty reasonable figure. And then for our LCCC, I believe it's about $380,000 of revenue for us. And I kind of wonder, the scholarship's a good idea, but I would maybe as a board member like to come back to something we looked at a year ago, maybe a little longer, when we talked about the fees we charge, because that we do to some degree control. Yes, students control some of their own fees, as we know, but we also control some of those fees. And I would simply ask if this goes through, that not only do we look at the scholarship option, but maybe we take a look at an option of how to help the students by taking a look at some fees that we could roll back. I know that you rolled those back in one area last year, and yes, we've set a budget, and that does have an impact, but I'd like to at least have us looking at that again.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, again, your comments are on target. I had similar comments from Trustee Erickson earlier today when speaking with student government. The other day, we talked about fees and the structure of fees. It is on our list to basically rewrite, and we've started that, revamping the process in which we consider new fees, the approval of fees, and look at the overall utilization of fees. The accounting office has implemented a new approach so we can actually take a look at fees generated for specific purposes and the utilization. So it's on our radar. We're moving on that. We'll get to that, and certainly this will push us even harder to get that work done if we see a tuition increase. One thing, Madam Chair, before I sit down, I'd just like to share. I'm sharing with you my perspective from LCCC and looking at the state's resources and where everything's at. I don't pretend to say that at Northern Wyoming Community College District, at Central Wyoming Community College, at Western, at Eastern, that they are in the exact same place as we are. It may be that they've stretched every penny that they have and they need this, and I know we'll have colleagues across the state that will be proponents of a tuition increase. And so I just don't want you to think that this is something that I believe is the perspective of all the colleges. This is just my perspective as I look at LCCC students and where we sit, and really what I believe to be in the best interest of our students. And so with that, I'll sit down, but another question.
Madam Chair, just to follow up on that, what is the rationale of the commission to have a 5% increase? Is it because they just want to have another 5% increase? Or is there some pressure, some demand, some definite purpose for having the statewide? Because we are unable, as we found out some time ago, to do it ourselves. It has to be through the commission. And to some extent, as I see it, we're kind of like the community colleges are kind of like a secondary land grant. And so we should expect a good assistance, financial assistance from the state. But coming back to the rationale for the commission to have another 5% increase.
Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, I believe that each institution is unique in many regards, and I think the financial resources they have, the student populations they have, the programming mix that they have creates some uniqueness. So, for example, would this be as much of an issue to Eastern Wyoming College, where a 5% tuition increase probably will generate very, very little when they rely so heavily on state appropriations? Probably not. But you can see the flip of that if you look at Western Wyoming College or the Northern Wyoming Community College District, which has its own unique natures because it has a very vibrant college in Gillette, that really isn't part of the district, which impacts its funding. And so they're seeing more students. Their state appropriation per student FTE is decreasing. They're seeing it, I believe, I don't want to speak for President Young, but I believe they're seeing it as a way to fill the need gap that they have there. Eastern's in a different place. We're all in very different places. So I think each president may have a very different rationale for supporting it or opposing it. From the commission standpoint, you can look at it. You have the commission's agenda and the booklet before you, and tab number 2 identifies sort of their analysis of tuition, and it's really a regional comparative analysis on our tuition rates with the WICHE average and trying to put us in a closer proportion of what the western states are charging, and that's really the rationale.
I'm sorry, it generates one more question. How many WICHE states have a state commission that's analogous to Wyoming? So how comparable are we to the other WICHE states?
Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, we're all horses, but horses of a different color. I think you would find similarities and yet significant differences between state control versus local control, governor-appointed regents or trustees versus elected, a CEO that oversees and supervises the presidents, to boards that do. I mean, it really runs the gamut, I believe. Highly legislative and systems like California to very, very loose systems in many ways like Wyoming. So it really is comparing apples to oranges to pomegranates to bananas.
Thank you, because that's the way I see it as well.
Madam Chair, would you entertain, or would it be appropriate for us to have a motion that would say we support keeping the tuition as is?
That's exactly what I would like to formalize, if that would help Joe take that back to the meeting in Rock Springs. And I would entertain that if you would like to make that motion, Ed, please.
I would, Madam Chair, that LCCC supports continuing the present rate of tuition for both in-state and out-of-state students.
I'll second it.
Any more discussion? Yes, please, Mohammed.
How much input, how much weight does the input from different community colleges have? Or how much weight does the input from the different community colleges has on the decisions that the commission makes? Does their mechanism allow for such input?
Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Chakad, yes, and I think they have a sincere interest in broadening the conversation, and that's why they're doing the meeting the way they're doing it this year. Ultimately, how much the perspective of this board will have in their consideration, I don't know. I guess it depends on how persuasive I can be at that meeting, maybe. But I don't know that boards of trustees, at least in the recent past, have taken a formal position and really shared that with the commission directly of where their interest is in terms of tuition. So in many ways, I doubt it's the first in the history, but it may be one in the recent past.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous, Vicki. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Schaefer. I appreciate that. Board reports, Governor's Business Forum. Trustee Mosier, please.
It's cold out there, and I'll try not to take too long, but I do want to say that I really appreciate the opportunity to have attended the Business Forum. The theme on the forum was economic strategies, civil discourse in society. There were really two elements in there. I found it to be an excellent opportunity to hear a number of different presenters for business. Of course, there were just tons of them there, including Ryman and many others who made presentations about what they've done in Wyoming and how they started, and etc. I did find the governor's opening remarks quite interesting. In particular, I felt that he really wanted us to focus on human resources and tax benefits of the state as being a way to attract business to the state of Wyoming. And David McCullough, Pulitzer Prize winning author, recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, He's a historian and presenter at many conferences. I really enjoyed hearing his comments. He's written such books as 1776, John Adams, Truman, and a number of others. You can look him up. He's quite the fellow to listen to. I think what fascinated me most about him was he really emphasized this issue of civility. And I thought it was appropriate for us, and Senator Lubnow also commented at the conference, and I tie him into McCullough's on civility, because Lubnow was talking about some of the challenges that our state legislators have regarding civility relative to the public. That, as we all know, with texting and all the other media that's out there, there's a tremendous amount of openness that people feel they can have when they communicate with you in that fashion, whether faceless to some degree, but somewhat. And Lubnow, I was really fascinated with the examples of some emails that were anything but civil that he talked about, not just for him, but for other legislators. And I bring you back then to McCullough, and McCullough really said there's so much need for civility, respect for others. And in particular, he gave an example of the Wright brothers and pointed out the need that often they had to be civil with each other, because I guess they weren't. And maybe that's because, and Kevin could shed light on that, maybe they were engineers, I don't know. They didn't have that.
And what does that mean?
But the sister to the Wright brothers, I guess at one point when they were having quite an extreme argument, according to McCullough, indicated that maybe they ought to consider that the problem should be the focus and the solution for them. So I thought that was interesting that he would approach it from that perspective. I'd leave you with a couple of comments from him that are very straight, very short. He said, in terms of employment and civility at work, he said, you really ought to be looking for people that have a passion for the work they do, that there's a dedication to the organization, and I think we've had that here at LCCC, and that's a wonderful part of it, and a passion, and use all methods to communicate to employees. And I thought that was such good advice, because I know here we've often had discussion about communications and some of the issues related to that, and we've talked about having one method of communication, and that was interesting. He was suggesting use any and all. And finally, he really closed up with use fact, passion, and reason. That will help you in civility. And then for educators, he had a great point. He said, the importance of humanity in education is undefinable. And I think he's right there. So, without my trying to drag us too far down the path, there was one other fellow that spoke that was really fascinating, and I wish there would have been, well, for a small fee, I guess you could get his recording. Retired Vice Chair of the National Intelligence Council, Herb Meyer, spoke. And what I found fascinating about his presentation was on population. And we all know, and when I was teaching international business, it was always fascinating to have students take a look at countries' fertility rates, growth rates, and populations, and so forth. And one that just I had missed in the last few years, I knew it was a problem for him, but I didn't realize it was this bad, is in Japan, you're practically at a point where Huggies have lower sales than Depends.
You may have to explain that, Ed. I don't think you want to.
I think we all do.
And as he talked about these populations, you need about a 2.1 rate in order to have a sustainable population. And neither Russia, nor Germany, nor many of the other European countries, and Japan, of course, and many others, just do not have that rate. And so when you look at this, and again, keep in mind we were at a business forum, he said, take a look at solutions of that. One of the things we all know is energy, but of course food, infrastructure, health care, all of those are opportunities that you can find in terms of business, even though you've got a change in the population rates and growth rates out there. I'll leave you with this in closing, and I found this interesting. He led us down the path, this Herb Meyer, a little bit longer with this, but I'll be brief. What do you call a group of cattle? A herd. What do you call a bunch of baboons? Congress. And with that, I leave my report.
Quote unquote.
Thank you, Ed, for your report. This is exactly what we want when we send someone to a conference. We want this kind of report back to the board. So, thank you, Ed.
I have something to say, but I think I'll wait and say it. It's about the evaluations. I'll say it during the retreat presentation that Dr. Schaefer's going to give. So we'll move on to the board policies, the first reading.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the board, since we've shifted away from the study session, business session format, traditionally we would bring you proposed policies in the study session and then bring them again for your approval in the next session. Because we have just business board meetings now, what I'd like to move us to is kind of a standard protocol of a first reading on a policy and then a second reading in which you could take action on that. And so you have 3 policies that have worked their way through the system internally that are here before you as a first reading. One is an accounting policy, the second is an investment policy, and then our audit policy. They're not incredibly complex, but if you have specific questions or would like some presentation on them, Vice President Hoagland's here to answer all your questions.
Vice President Hoagland, would you please go to the podium? Because I think Trustee Kilty has a question. On which one are you going to speak first?
Oh, I guess I was going to speak on the accounting policy first, that came first in the list.
Okay.
And I don't really care who answers it, but it's a short policy, but I think it's important. And it says here the Laramie County Community College will provide guidelines and procedures on the processing of fiscal documents. I understand that that's just instructions for accounting itself, but it says then in the monitoring of college budgets too, and that now involves the board. So the college is kind of an ill-defined entity in here. Who is going to provide these guidelines and procedures, and what will be the responsibility of the board in following them?
You want me to?
None.
Madam Chair, Trustee Kilty, well, I think by design, it would be coming from our office and how we develop the procedures. Now, if the board would like a bigger role in that, I suppose we could take it through the Finance and Facility Committee and have you review those if you'd like to do that.
Well, you know that's a central responsibility of the board. And I don't think it's appropriate at all for the administration to be giving procedures to the board about how we monitor college budgets. So,
Well, I don't think it was intended to be for the boards. In fact, it wasn't intended to be for the board, and there will be a budget policy that comes forward as well. This is just how we're going to monitor the budgets, not how we're going to establish those, and that will come through with the budget policy, which isn't developed yet.
okay, but something about this brought me back to an earlier time when we had policy governance here who said that if the president and maybe even other people were involved in this, decided that what the board was asking for was too much trouble, they could just tell them, no, we won't do it. And, I think we've been quite reasonable in requesting information on budgets. I think it's helped us understand much better how the college runs, and I think it's helped the college as well, some of the things that we've asked for. And I'm going to fight any limitation on what the board tries to ask for with regard to budgets.
Now, Madam Chair, Dr. Kilty, that's certainly not the intent or even the spirit of any of these. What we are trying to do is establish a policy framework that would allow us to actually create mechanisms to provide transparency to the variety of things that we do. This accounting policy, for example, will actually have a series of procedures that will be appended to it that will very clearly delineate the approach we take to a variety of things. And that approach will identify the parameters in which you could easily request request different things. So one of them that we're working on right now, and I don't know if it's in here, is how we provide cellular phone allowances to people on campus. You know, no documentation in the past, there was no other purpose, but when that question would come from the board, I want to know who is receiving a cellular phone allowance, what are the parameters. This will guide us to the procedures that will ultimately be able for us to clearly give you that information, and
Okay.
that's the spirit of the policy.
Okay, I just wanted that clarified.
Very good. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
when these procedures then are developed, I'm assuming that we would get an overview of them?
Madam Chair, Trustee Moser, certainly they're there. They're under our policies.lcccc.edu. Yes, you got it. That website, they'll all be out there, and they're administrative procedures that we believe are put into place that ultimately comply with your policy direction. If at ever a time you believe that our administrative procedures don't comply with your policy direction, that's when you call me and say, we don't believe this does, show us how it does that, and go through. And so they're all there for everybody to see and to follow and actually evaluate as we put them into practice.
May I speak on it too?
You may.
I'm really looking forward to this, because I think it's going to simplify the information that we receive, because we'll have this monitoring system put into effect. I see your concern, Trustee Kevin. I just can't, you're Kevin, you're just Kevin. So anyway, I can see your concern, but I think this is definitely a move in the right direction to help simplify the information coming to us so that it's more understandable.
Tara, would you have any input on this information or the policy itself?
We have not, no.
Would you like time to review it?
These?
Yes, before second reading?
I have no issues with that.
You have, with any of the three?
No.
Thank you very much. So, do we just want to look at all three of them?
Again, yep, Madam Chair, members of the board, this is your first reading. Certainly spend more time with them, consider them. If you have additional questions, you certainly have that opportunity at the second reading. I believe these will come forward at your first meeting in January, and that's when we'll actually recommend and ask you to take action on them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And if you want to change any of the wording, why don't we make those requests to Dr. Schaefer? And then we could have questions answered before the meeting if possible? Or call Tara and talk to her about that?
We actually didn't draft these policies.
Right.
I don't want anybody to be confused which policies we've drafted, so that's an explanation there. We didn't, I believe.
Mhm.
I believe Vice President Hoagland did.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
I can certainly field any questions about changing language or wording things to be more effective or to your liking, and communicate with Vice President Hoagland on that, so sure. Absolutely.
I think that would be wise.
Yeah, absolutely,
Thank
definitely
you.
available.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Carol.
And Madam Chair, members of the board, just real briefly to remind you, the process in which we go through as we develop these. We develop two documents typically in tandem, or at least relational documents in tandem, board policy documents and administrative procedures. And those start from wherever the functional authority, knowledge, expertise resides, in this case from the finance side in regard to accounting and audit and those types of things. As those are drafted, they come first to the President's Cabinet. We go through them, we look at them, see if there's gaps, those types of things. They may go back. Once we have our first reading of them, then we put them out to the campus for consultative feedback. And so they're out there for feedback, for consideration, comment, both the policy and the procedure. They're out there. Once we get that feedback, they'll come back to Cabinet. That feedback is incorporated. If it's not incorporated, there's rationale why it's not incorporated. Then we give the nod, and then they go to the College Council. And the College Council is asked to consider both the policy and procedure again, debate them, look at the feedback, look at all of those things, and ultimately ratify them both. In one sense, they're ratifying a procedure and recommending to me that it be implemented, but they're also ratifying a policy and recommending to me that that's passed on to you for recommendation. And so there's an exhaustive, and well, maybe not exhaustive is the right word, but an extensive process in which we go through to really have a lot of internal debate and input process brought into these before they actually get to you. As part of that process, and I believe we're still doing this, we loop our legal counsel in as these policies are being developed so that they can get a first blush at them and help advise us on things that, you know, they may want to see corrected before it actually gets to this stage. But I do think it's still wise counsel to always consult your legal counsel as you're considering policies.
Trustee Mosier?
Madam Chair, I'm just a little curious about in 1.0 policy and purpose on investment policy. It's in the second sentence. Custodian of public and student monies entrusted to the college. And I'm not naive here, but I'm a little unknowing about what you mean by student monies. Are we talking SFAC? Are we talking any organizations which generate donations and funds to, let's say, I'll pick on Rotaract since Jerry's here. Tell me what that means, because I'm not sure student monies is kind of a broad category in my mind.
Do you want to add?
Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, it is the responsibility of the college to monitor any of the funds that come through the college books that are on our books, regardless of the source of funds. And so it is our intent to be able to apply the regulations, too strong a word, but the procedures that we operate all of the funds that we have within the institution to the student funds as well. And so that's what the intent of this is. There are less and more procedure depending upon the types of funds. So I think you were trying to get to club funds, and we would monitor those for legality is probably a good source, but probably not with the same restrictions that we would with the SAC funds or the general funds or the auxiliary funds. But we do have a fiduciary responsibility as an institution to make sure that they are being used in the best interest of the institution and of the students.
Trustee Mosier, if I may perhaps clarify what I see, my interpretation of what this language says. It's not expanding anything the college is currently doing. It's not giving them any more control or power or anything that they don't already have. It's simply actually putting more of a limitation in place, saying we acknowledge we are the stewards of this money and we're going to use it wisely. That's really what it's saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good answer. That's our job.
Right.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we will take number 8, board retreat. Joe.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is a draft agenda for your board retreat in Laramie on January 24th. It is a full agenda, but I will tell you that there was probably at least another 3 days that we could have added to this based on the topics that are out there right now. But I wanted to propose something that capitalized on you holding this over in Laramie, and with some of the changes that are happening at the university and their willingness to be engaged with you, we thought that was really something that we wanted to try to capitalize on. So just running through the agenda briefly, what I'm proposing, and I've had some conversation with the board chair, is that we start the morning with your conversation about board evaluation. I know you wanted to have some discussion about the feedback you received from the dinners you had with the different constituent groups on campus. We have a commitment from the university that I think will follow nice with our own commitment, or Dr. Fierro has been committed, maybe I should say, to presenting to you the work that they've been doing here on campus on general education changes. I know that's an interest to many of you. And then we'll follow that by a presentation on the university's new university studies program, or their general education program, and have a commitment from the folks who have been working on that over at UW to come and present to you on that. We'll spend lunch with the AAC advisory board, ACC advisory board. I believe that we can get the acting president, Dick McGinnity, of the university to come join us. He has expressed interest in actually coming for the Gen Ed proposals, but if his schedule will allow it, probably spend lunch with you and with the ACC Advisory Board, and then move into.
You pay your bill?
We're checking the generators, right, to see if they kick in.
That may be.
It's
Oh.
okay.
We're back on.
Maybe.
Fade to black.
You're using your head.
It will follow into a presentation on the Level 1 study. I think it's important that you hear that, and you hear that from the members of the joint committee that actually went through the Level 1 study for the new Albany County campus building on UW, and they've agreed to come and do that presentation. And then I want to spend about 2 hours during this retreat going through the entire suite and the changes of the human resources policies. And we had the first presentation and discussion at President's Cabinet, and I can tell you it took all of 2 hours just to go through and discuss some of the major philosophical shifts and some of the practical shifts in regards to the HR policies. So I've asked Peggy, Deb, and I don't know if Tara and Gay will be there as well, to kind of walk you through these major changes to the HR policies. And I think that's going to take every bit of 2 hours, but this is important work, and we need to take the time to do that. And then close with what I've promised you, which is a draft of some guiding principles that you may want to consider adopting for student success and really the environment of LCCC. So it's a full day, starting at 9 and adjourning at 5 on Friday the 24th with dark skies and possibly inclement weather. So I just wanted you to be aware of it. But I think it's a good agenda and one that should benefit the board and many others. So with that, Madam Chair.
I would just like to talk about the evaluation, the board evaluation that.
Before you get to that, may I make a comment?
Of course.
It's on the overall agenda rather than that specific area. I think these items really are very timely, most likely going to help us learn about a variety of things. But my reaction is that it's more of a seminar than it is a retreat. When I think of a retreat overall, I think of kind of an introspection and a discussion. And I hope, now getting to your evaluation thing, that maybe we could spend a little more time than, I don't know how we can do it, than that hour that just seems like it's kind of compressing our openness to discuss the evaluations. I just opened that up. If there's no one else that feels that way, then I guess we just move along with the way the agenda is. But I just had a reaction to the fact that I didn't think there's enough time for us to really look at the evaluations.
I certainly respect how you feel about it, and we can take that under advisement. And how does the rest of the board feel
I
about
would
this?
suggest if we don't finish it, then we worry about it the next meeting.
Sure.
I think this is fine the way it is, but if that isn't enough time, then we can finish it at another time.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Trustee
It
Mosier.
might actually work out. I really hear what Trustee Erickson is suggesting there, but I'm thinking maybe, we'll have a lot of that discussion, and then the next steps in the board goals, that may be the foundation. Our discussion there would be the foundation for actually accomplishing those goals. We can work on them and then maybe put those together. I kind of envision we might even wind up with a subcommittee to maybe work a little bit on those goals. It's just a perspective I have that I was going to bring up when we were doing this.
And you're talking about the goals that come out of the evaluation.
Correct.
Okay, because I was thinking that 1 hour probably isn't long enough, but what I would charge the board to do, because we have a committee of Dawn, Bill, and myself, and over the last week and a half, I have really thought about this, and I would like to engage the full board, and I talked to Kevin about this, in evaluating ourselves and taking the information from not only of our evaluation, but from the 3 groups that we met with for dinner. So all of you have that information, and I would like each of you to look through it carefully, and some comments are made that we probably won't want to take to heart, but many comments that were made during all of these evaluations are things that were heartfelt to the people giving them. So we have to take them into consideration. So if each of you could please look through it, and it'll take some time because it's already taken some time, and get back with me in the written form by email. And then when we have our first committee meeting, then we will take all of that into consideration. And I know Trustee Kilty has something to say here.
Yeah, and I don't want to throw more on the plate, but we also have the campus morale survey, or the AQUIP, Leading and Communicating Survey. And I'm just wondering if the results of that are going to be tabulated and available to the board by that time.
Interesting, yeah.
Madam Chair, members of the board, that's something too that we could add to your January 15th meeting as well, because you do have a board meeting, right before this, and certainly add that. I know the initial analysis is done, but nothing with the open-ended conversation or some of the additional analysis that College Council had asked from Ann Murray, but by then I'm sure we'd have a pretty comprehensive picture of that.
Good. Thank you, Kevin. Marty advised us to, out of these evaluations, to have some action planning going forward and prioritization that is critical for the board, which is what Ed is alluding to. And also, in speaking with Joe, well, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I think we need to have we need to identify some guidance for him in what the board would like to see him accomplish. And he thinks that we have done that fairly well, but out of this evaluation, there might be some items that we would like to give him more guidance. Is that correct, or did I say that wrong?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I don't want to disagree with you. I think my perspective is as you work on what you see as action items, goals, or things that emerge out of that, you employ me as your staff person, and I can help you with accomplishing whatever types of goals or action items that you identify. And that's the type of guidance that you could give me after you've had this conversation. And if it's expanded orientation sessions, if it's access to specific types of events or activities, those are the things you could certainly charge me with doing to help you achieve the goals that you set for yourselves as a board for board improvement.
Madam Chair, I think it would be helpful for us to revisit Dr. Joe's assessment of his performance in the various goal areas. Last July, we put together about a 3-page, and I don't remember all of it, but I think it would be very useful.
It was riveting.
Oh, yes, it was. Yeah, right.
It was good, though, and I think you're right. Riveting, that's
Well,
right.
no, it was riveting, but also there were some areas that it was critical of himself as well,
Yes.
which I think is useful for us to go back and look at that and be prepared for that in light of what you just got done saying about Dr. Joe.
Because if Dr. Schaefer's already said it about himself, then we probably don't need to give him that kind of guidance and leadership. He's already on that track. So, is that okay? Can
That's
we
something
have
you're going to do
people-
again, right? Every year?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, every year I will do a self-evaluation that I will give to you as part of my evaluation, as well as proposing goals and ultimately establishing personal goals for myself that you hopefully will hold me accountable to.
Okay, any other comments?
I'd just like to say that all of the comments, and I've read them all thoroughly, obviously more than once, but, I'm just saying I personally disagree with a lot of them, and I think that's something that could come through discussion, because I don't think all those things are right, and sometimes I think it's just a bitter pill that someone's having to swallow that day, and there's a lot of it that I don't think is right. This will come through discussion.
Thank you, Bill, and I would agree that we need to glean out and bring out the items that we really want to take and move forward with. So I think if the whole board participates and then we bring it to committee, we'll have a good list. Oh. Nothing more?
We'll get it organized.
Okay, we've already approved number 9. Is there any new business?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would just like to speak for a minute about some data that Joe sent us that was at my request. I had convinced myself that we actually had more administration here than we did before Joe started, and so I asked Joe to make a report about how many administrative positions we had, and I asked for the dean and above. Joe added a couple of directors' positions to that list, and I think that confuses the issue because we've got directors here who are professional staff, and we've got directors who are administrators, and that sort of muddies the water at that point. And all of you, I think, received that data, and I don't know if you looked at it or not, but in the last meeting, we approved a resolution regarding a 5% compounding increase in completions for the next decade. And we did that without regard to whether or not it can be done without new resources. If new resources were needed, what might they look like and what might they cost? And so in addition to that report on administrative positions, which I think I'm going to go back at and look one more time because I'll have something more to say about it. But I would challenge Joe at this point to make another report, and I think this one would be important, about positions that we have eliminated at the college that represent savings going forward. And those resources maybe could be used in the event that we have to plow some resources into that initiative. And so just for our January 15th meeting, is that it? January the 15th? I'd like to see a report on what positions have now been eliminated in the college, positions where people retired and we didn't replace those positions, and things like that. Things that represent savings. Please.
Madam Chair, members of the board, happy to do that for the board. Much of it will be representative of what we've included in your budget documents, at least since I've been here, under the sources and uses documents in there, but I'm happy to compile that and bring that for as a presentation.
Madam Chair?
Thank you. Yes.
The report you're talking about relative to the number of administrative positions, somehow that must have slipped by me. I don't recall.
It came in
receiving
an
it.
email.
Well, I realize that, and I usually look at my email, but I
Oh.
believe it kind of slipped by me. I wonder if we could have another copy of it.
Of course. Do you mind, Vicki? Thank you very much.
In fact, it may be something that we could just discuss very briefly at that January 15th meeting, once we've had a chance to digest it.
Excellent. Okay. Trustee Mosier, did you have something?
Yeah, just a quick thing, and this is due, the paper had an article on this, but since we were talking policies, kind of felt like it would be nice if we had a review of that and took a look at it, and that would be our conflict of interest policy.
No, I brought that already. I brought it up with Joe already today, and so he's going to
See?
work on that.
Great, because, and in that too, I can remember back a couple of years ago, a question about what would be appropriate for a board member in terms of if there was a gift. And so some of those kinds of things, I think.
Where it begins.
Yeah. You know,
What'd you
so,
say?
That's where it begins. Where does it end?
Conflicts of interest.
But, you know, maybe, and I understand, we're looking at that, so I'll shut up because we're done with that.
Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, the chairwoman did bring that up. We've had, to my knowledge, an interesting history of using conflict of interest, and then as an institution, we've shifted to conflict of commitment or something like that. But it is an accreditation requirement that we have a conflict of interest policy, and certain individuals, including trustees and executives, sign that and disclose any potential conflicts on an annual basis. So we've started working on that. It's in the hopper, has not made it done yet. It needs to be done before we complete our systems portfolio, and maybe I'll even ask Tara to work with me on that to get it going. But it is something we need to do, and it's a nice prod to put a little fire behind that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, under new business,
Yeah.
from an organization of the board agenda, like today we had board reports, and the one board report we had was the excellent report by trustee Mosier. And then, so we have 2 meetings now that are business meetings. And it's the second meeting, I think, that we generally will have the finance and facilities report, correct? Okay, so we can expect that on the second meeting, we would have that. I wonder if at the first meeting of the month, we might have board reports, such as like the new, I don't know what we're calling it, Building Forward subcommittee that Chris and Bill and I are going to be on with you, that we talked about, which is basically an extension from the capital campaign. So I'm wondering if we might anticipate then in the first meeting of the month that we have board reports for things other than the finance and facilities and the accounting.
To kind of split up
Yes.
information so
Yeah,
that
so
we're
we
not.
know
Yes.
when we're going to be expected to give our reports.
I think that's a
I
fine
think the
idea.
reason the student government and all those things come at the second one is because they have had a chance then to meet.
I'm
Sure.
not talking about them, though.
Okay,
No,
thank
no, I'm
you.
not talking about them.
Fine.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the board reports, that like, we only had one board report today, and that was trustee Mosier. But, you know, a month from now, have a report on the Building Forward subcommittee.
I think that's fine. The only time that I would divert from that policy, or, you know, however we want to call that, is like if someone just goes to a meeting, like when we went to Seattle, we'd want to report as soon as we got back, and not, although I think we did delay because we just had gotten back. But I think there could be an occasional time when someone would want to make a report out of order. But I
Madam
think
Chair,
that's not a
I
bad
would see
idea.
this as trustee Erickson simply saying this is our practice, common practice.
Right,
We do
common
it that way,
practice.
and sure, there'd be exceptions.
So Vicki, can we get that?
Quite clear which reports are going to be on which board meeting agenda.
Keep the ones that are now on, like, all the governments on the second meeting, and these new trustee reports at the first meeting,
All of
is
those
how I
including the
understood that.
finance and facilities?
No,
Finance
no.
at the
No.
second.
Second.
That has to be second, because otherwise we won't have had the meeting.
Yeah, they have to have time.
So all of the board reports except finance and facilities.
Mhm.
Okay, got it. Will do.
It's fine.
Is that okay? Okay. And if it doesn't work, we can change it again. How's that? Okay, any public comment, anything that was not on the agenda this evening? If there is none, then I think I will, oh,
Madam,
I'm so sorry, I
Chair.
missed you. Yes.
As there's no more business, I move that we adjourn this meeting, recess for just a brief time, and reconvene for an executive session to talk about a personnel matter.
Perfect,
And a
thank you,
second, please.
Second.
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, we haven't done this much.
I thought I was going to get out of here early.
We could. I
how
think this will be
stupid
very
can you
short.
be?
It's not even 9 o'clock yet.
I know.
All right, we got